To hear the full episode, become a patron at patreon.com/deathpanelpod.
Welcome to the Death Panel. Patrons, thank you. Your support truly makes this show possible, and we couldn't do any of this without you. If you value our work, you want to help us keep this project going, become a patron. We rely on listeners like you to sustain the show. You can join at patreon.com/deathpanelpod to get access to weekly bonus episodes and our full back catalog with hundreds of hours of bonus content. And to help us out some more, post about your favorite episodes, pick up copies of Health Communism, A Short History of Transmisogyny, and Abolish Rent at your local bookstore, or request them at your local library. Hold reading or discussion groups, share the show with someone who needs to hear it, and of course, you can follow us at deathpanel_. I'm Beatrice Bolton, and my guests today are Kim Wilson and Maya Schenwar. Together, Kim and Maya are editors of a new and incredibly wonderful anthology from Haymarket called We Grow the World Together, Parenting Toward Abolition. And I'm so excited to have them both on the show today to talk about the project. First, I'll introduce Kim. Dr. Kim Wilson is an artist, educator, writer, and organizer. She co-founded, co-hosts, and produces the podcast Beyond Prisons about incarceration and abolition. A social scientist with a PhD in urban affairs and public policy, her work examines how poverty, racism, ableism, and heteropatriarchy function within and beyond carceral structures, revealing the systemic intent to marginalize vulnerable communities. Kim, welcome to the Death Panel.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us today. And next, Maya. Maya Schenwar is editor-at-large at Truthout and director of the Truthout Center for Grassroots Journalism. She works to reshape journalism for the public good while organizing and writing toward liberation. She is the co-author of the 2020 book, Prison by Any Other Name, co-editor of Who Do You Serve, Who Do You Protect? Police Violence and Resistance in the United States from 2016, and author of Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better from 2014. Maya, welcome to the Death Panel.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you both so much for sitting down with me to talk about this anthology. I've wanted to have each of you on the show for so long, and it's such a treat to get to speak to you two together. And again, today, listeners, we're talking about this new book that Maya and Kim edited out from Haymarket called We Grow the World Together, Parenting Toward Abolition, which is a fantastic book made up of so many offerings from a ton of wonderful contributors, many of whom we've had the great honor of speaking with on Death Panel as well. You know, some Death Panel fan favorites are in this book, like Ruthie Gilmore, Victoria Law, Mariam Kaba, Shira Hassan, Harsha Walia, but there are so many more wonderful contributors to this anthology. Now, parenting and caregiving are often imagined as deeply personal, individualistic, even private endeavors, but We Grow the World Together offers a powerful challenge to that framing. This is a book about parenting and abolition, yes, but it's also a book about care, about interdependence, about the ways that we create the world that we want in the relationships that we build and sustain every day. And crucially, you know, this is not just a book for parents. It's for anyone thinking about what it means to nurture, protect, and build lives together, to fight for a world beyond punishment and policing, and to reject the isolating and neoliberal logics of the nuclear family as the primary individualistic unit of all life under capitalism. This anthology weaves together personal narratives, radical histories, and practical reflections for living abolition in daily life. The book offers lessons on mutual aid, resisting family policing, practicing transformative justice at home, and reimagining how we raise future generations and support ourselves and each other in a way that affirms life rather than enforces control. Now, Kim and Maya, you have brought together a collection that is as expansive as it is deeply grounded, and I'm so excited to talk about the book together today and discuss what it means to parent toward abolition, why abolition is inseparable from the struggle for reproductive and caregiving justice, and how these ideas resonate far beyond the idea of parenting in the traditional sense. Now, abolition is often framed as a project of tearing things down, but We Grow the World Together makes it clear that abolition is about growing, about making the world we need and the relationships we build and the care we sustain. The book brings together all these different voices, organizers, caregivers, parents, people raising kids behind bars, and even kids themselves to show that abolition isn't a distant demand. It's something people are already living. So just to start us off today, can you both talk about what the original vision for this book was and how you both see this book expanding and reinforcing The idea of abolition is something that's practiced, not just theorized.
Absolutely. I'm going to defer to Maya. She usually tells our origin story.
Yeah, I can start us out. So for many of us who are parents who are doing movement work in all kinds of spaces, there's this kind of dual reality that we're in the struggle, but no matter what's going on in the world or whatever the political urgency is, we're also doing this daily, hourly, sometimes second by second care work of being responsible for the lives of young people. And I think that this is more expansive than just a kind of this traditional parent-child relationship. We talk a lot in the book about chosen family, about different kinds of caregiving, but this constant ongoing care work is happening alongside and inside of movement work. But so often it's something that's invisibilized, and care work can be seen as something that takes us away from the movement. And this was something that I was feeling so keenly when my kid was little during the 2020 uprisings. And that's kind of when the seeds of this book were planted. So many people were talking about abolition. We were at this peak of kind of abolitionist consciousness developing. And people were talking not only about dismantlement, about we have to tear down these systems, but also really, to everyone's credit, particularly all of our longtime abolitionist leaders, particularly Black feminists, talking about building the world we want. How are we creating the world we want to live in together? And a lot of that world was taking care of each other. And I was thinking about the fact that we were talking so much in movement spaces about care, and yet I felt isolated from the movement because I had this young child, because I was doing this day-to-day caregiving kind of behind the scenes that felt in my mind separate. And I talked to a friend about this contradiction who had a much older child, and she said straight out to me, that is the work. You are doing the work every day, caring for your child and caring for your child in community and in the movement. But that care work, it's integral and intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
And so that got me thinking about what other organizers might be thinking in relation to this intertwined organizing and caregiving work. And what would it mean for people to actually articulate that in public, talk about that interdependence, talk about the lessons they're learning from parenting that are informing their movement work, and vice versa. Like, there's so many parenting guides out there, but we hadn't really seen any that were like, okay, here are the lessons I learned from revolutionary struggle, and I'm applying them in my home, you know? So there was that element. And then also, I was thinking all the time about how parents who are directly impacted by the prison industrial complex are continually doing that caregiving inside of prisons, outside of prisons, through prison walls. My sister was incarcerated when I first had my baby, and I was conscious of her also parenting her child from behind bars. So there was that element too of when we talk about abolition, how do we also incorporate that? So there were all these different elements, and it seemed to be really important to create a book about how parenting and movements for abolition are not only connected, but how they fuel each other. And so I knew I couldn't edit this book by myself. I knew I couldn't write it by myself because it had to be a collective project, just like abolition is a collective project. But I also knew that I couldn't be some sort of sole editor on this project. And I reached out to Kim and I crossed all my fingers because Kim has been a role model for me, both as an abolitionist and also a parent. And crossed all my fingers, wrote a really long email, and Kim just wrote back, yes, which I still laugh about to this day. Just like, why'd you write me such a long email? But yeah, Kim said yes. And I have to say is like in thinking about all those questions together and then getting to read all of the offerings from the caregivers and organizers and people creating chosen family and doing care work in all these contexts, I felt nurtured by this project. I felt like it actually was a community building, a family building project in itself. And I'll turn it over to Kim. But yeah, I feel like We Grow the World Together also included this book. Like this book was a generative project.
Absolutely. And I echo everything that, Maya just said. I would just add, a couple of things. When Maya approached me and she, already told you, it's like my response was like one word. Yeah, I'm in, right? Or yeah, I'm down, something along those lines. But, it was almost like this aha moment, right? We jumped on the phone and we started talking about what our vision is for the project, right? And I'm someone who's like, pedagogically, let's just, do a brain dump, right? Everything in the kitchen sink gets put on the table. Let's just talk it through and figure out what's what. There are no bad ideas. I mean, there are, but we'll get there. Let's just, get this out there to begin with. And we spent a lot of time, talking through what our vision would be for the book and going back and forth and reflecting, right? And one of the things is, as Maya pointed out, was that we wanted to make sure, well, we both felt strongly that neither one of us wanted to be, quote unquote, an expert, right? An expert in parenting. And I think that that's one of the kind of, underpinnings of the book is that people approach this work with a tremendous amount of humility. Right. Mm-hmm. No one is, no one's out here saying, oh, my gosh, I'm a parenting expert and, you should listen to me because of X, Y, Z. If anything, what people are saying is, think of these again, as you said in the introduction, these are offerings, right? These are offerings and invitations into some really incredible people's lives, very personal, very intimate accounts of how they're thinking about parenting with their partners, with their community, with, their chosen family and what have you. And I think that that's really what the secret sauce of the book, if you will, is that, we're getting all of these different perspectives, all of these views from people that, I've long looked up to, right? So Maya says she looks up to me and I'm always like, what are you looking up to, girl? Like, no, what are you talking about? But a lot of these folks, for me are intellectual mentors, right? Even if they're, some of them are younger than I am and, some of them are elders. But along the way, I've learned a tremendous amount from all of these contributors in one way or another. And I feel like that's really the strength of the book. But we also wanted to focus on, the problems that we're talking about, right? All of these big problems regarding prisons or poverty or, the lack of childcare and all these big systemic problems, right? That we're confronting. We're expected to deal with them on an individual level, right? So we get blamed as parents for our failures, right? Without any kind of real recognition or support that we're not supposed to be doing this work alone. Right? That it was never meant for us to be going at it alone. And alone, I mean, even if you have, a partner, even if you have a small group of people around you, that's not enough, that we just don't have a culture, right, in this country where it's like, these are our children. And I feel like that was a really important kind of thread that is woven throughout the book and something that even if people don't thematize it in their essays, that they, that they're gesturing towards, that they're talking about. And I think that that's a really important part of the book. So I'm hoping that in terms of, your question, what do we hope people get from it? I mean, I feel like there are a lot of different takeaways. Everybody's going to have a different read of it. These 29 essays, it's a huge collection. right? And everybody's writing about it from using their own kind of like framework, their own methodologies. The big broad thing that brings us all together is that, we're abolitionists. But what does that look like on the ground? What does that look like in your daily life? What does that look like in terms of, building community? We're hearing a lot of that right now. It's like, build community. And people that don't, have like, they're like, what does that mean?
Right.
It sounds great.
What's community?
Right. But they're like, oh, what the hell does that mean? Like, how am I supposed to build it when I've never experienced it, when I don't know what that is? And I feel like the book really does provide 29 examples of how you engage in community building, particularly for this moment, right? And we didn't set out, we didn't have a crystal ball or anything like that. I mean, I feel like, abolitionists can, in a lot of ways, be the canaries in the coal mine, if you will, regarding like where we're going. You can see, you have the evidence there, you're seeing what's happening, you're paying very close attention to what's going on. So I feel like, particularly for this moment, for folks that are feeling super frustrated, folks that are feeling depleted and on the verge of despair or have, gone off that cliff already, that the book is like, well, wait a minute, we got this. Like, we've got this. We can do this. And this is what this looks like for us right now.
Absolutely. And it comes off so much, even just from like the first contribution from EJ, who's 6 at the time of writing. And EJ's offering is called, I Want to Start School So I Can Learn to Write Letters to My Dad in Prison. And I was like, it's just, I read that one and I put the book down and I thought about what EJ wrote for like 3 days before I picked the book up again. And there's so many different ways that this is approached. And as you both talk about in the book, there wasn't a prescriptive list where you sat down and strategized, we're going to ask, this person to talk about this and that person to talk about that. But the book is so cohesive because it's all oriented around, practice. And, well, I guess, Maya, as you put it in the introduction, quote, we dream, we plan, we ditch our plans, we do, we undo, we dream and do again. And there is such a difference between this and other quote unquote parenting books, right? Like, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, I've had the great displeasure of reading a lot of Emily Oster's parenting books because of Emily Oster's work around, manufacturing consent for pandemic abandonment. And it's just really I cannot emphasize like the immense depth of contrast between the way that like expertise is framed as a very top-down thing in the genre of parenting books and what this book is offering readers, which is humility, trust, openness, vulnerability, and an acknowledgement that mistakes and creativity are like key ingredients for this process. And it's inspiring. It's also, I think, 29 great examples of what community is really is a great way of describing it. It works against that kind of impulse of individuation that is such a hallmark of like how we think about the way a family discourse is discussed, like whether we're talking about the welfare state or the kind of natalist rhetoric that is so primary right now, or, housing or healthcare, right? Like all of these things flow through this idea of the family and kind of take it as a given that everyone knows what that is and that kind of dominant idea is true and right and primary. And it never really like gets actually fleshed out exactly how alienating this kind of individuation is in the invocation of like, families first or something.
Yeah.
But it's just, this book is just so working against that materially without even having to, from a broad declarative standpoint, be like, we're going to organize everyone together all at once specifically to work against this, right? It really shows that the core of so many abolitionist thinkers and so many approaches to abolition is to work against that individuation and to also understand how the framing of the individual family also, and the kind of personal responsibility narrative, especially like baked into the fantasy of the American dream and the good life. One of the sort of primary mythologies that we're constantly engaging with as abolitionists, the idea that, these are individual responsibilities and individual units, and that we don't need each other, that we aren't interdependent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was part of the challenge of gathering essays for this book that we wanted to really step back from and step away from that concept of a parenting book where you are usually instructing adults on how to control their usually biological children to become basically cogs in a capitalist system, not to overgeneralize, but it's this very kind of like adultist concept, even in, the gentle parenting circles, but that it's still this kind of individuated, siloed, top-down approach that we're all living in our little boxes. And so we wanted to make sure to reject that from the get-go. But we didn't have to do it explicitly in soliciting offerings, because as people thought about abolition in their family building, they were talking about it in practice and also talking about it in a broader context. I'm thinking about Nadine Never and Stacey Austin's essay, where they're talking about how colonialism and imperialism operate through the family, and how enforcing kind of these heteropatriarchal family units was such a big part of colonization, and how then it translates into situations where, for example, Palestinian families who've had to flee Palestine and are living perhaps here without their extended families and not able to rely on these extended communities that are the way to do family in so many places, and how at that point they get blamed for being quote unquote bad parents, for not being able to do absolutely everything, and how the breakup of actual networks of care results in this kind of guilting and punishment, and as Dorothy Roberts talks about, kidnapping, the taking away of children by the family policing system in relation to Black and Indigenous mothers in particular. So I think our goal of kind of challenging that individuation came through when people talked about, here's what's happening in practice, like in terms of how people are doing family building, but also in the ways that family is being imposed on us, or the way authorities are trying to impose it on us from above.
To hear the full episode, become a patron at patreon.com/deathpanelpod. You'll get access to this and the rest of our catalog of patron-only episodes, and be the first to get a new patron episode every Monday when it drops. With love, the Death Panel.